You're listening to Heal Through Humor, hosted by yours truly, Talia Bombola. I'm a licensed therapist on a mission to help others learn about themselves and laugh along the way. Hello.
Hello.
I'm excited to have you here today. For our listeners, whoever's tuning in, welcome to Heal Through Humor. I am greatly and have been greatly looking forward to today's guest, Miss Vanessa Bennett, and she is here to talk to us about codependency, her book. If you have not gotten your hands on a copy of it, I'm going to let her do the pitch for it. It's phenomenal. It really does break down relationships and how to heal and repair with what I took from it was a very relationship-oriented mindset. So the goal afterwards of the repair is to still be in the relationship and like the person. Not
what a concept.
Yeah, right? What a new concept. Not just using the jargon. So without further ado, Vanessa, please go ahead and take it away. Introduce yourself and we'll dive on in to Heal Through Humor.
Thank you, Talia. I'm so happy to be here. It's always like, who am I? What am I? I don't even know these days. I do so many things, which I guess is kind of like all of our MOs these days, right? So I am a Los Angeles-based psychotherapist, but I'm also an author, a podcaster myself, content creator. What was the term I started using the other day? A clinical entrepreneur.
Ooh,
yeah.
I may have done that.
It's good, right?
Yeah, that's very good.
It's good. So I'm also that. Also a mama of a little one and just all the things, you know, like I said, we're all spinning many plates these days.
All of the roles. Yeah. I think some of the best titles that we can come up with don't even begin to cover all of the things. So clinical entrepreneur, definitely. I've heard like therapreneur, like a combo of like therapist entrepreneur, but really it's deeper than that. I think
so.
One role, one part of many things that we do.
I think so. I think clinical entrepreneur is a good catch-all phrase.
I will definitely be adopting that and crediting you with that.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So what got you started in this work? And you do speak a lot and write a lot about codependency. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah. So I came to the wellness space by way of not the wellness space. I was in advertising and marketing as a producer for about 10 years in New York, doing the grind and the hustle until I kind of hit that proverbial burnout wall and was miserable and didn't know why and started my own journey, right? So started my own therapy, my own yoga practice, finding meditation, all of these things. And it obviously just completely changed the trajectory of my own life. So through that, decided I wanted to also study psychology and become a therapist. But when I was in New York, there were no schools in New York that really interested me. I wasn't really interested in behavioral techniques. I was very actually turned off by a lot of CBT work. And I wanted to go deeper. And so I ended up moving out here to Los Angeles and going to a school in Santa Barbara called Pacifica.
Yes.
Which is a depth psychology school. So my background is in Jungian psychology. And up until recently, there's only 2 schools in the entire country that even offered that as a program, right? Both out here, which is not surprising. So for those listening who don't know, depth psychology is known as the psychology of the soul, right? So it is a very kind of holistic, more spiritual centered approach to the psychological landscape. And yeah, so through that, I just, I did all the things. Like I went on for the license, I did the internship, all the stuff. I realized pretty early on, I didn't really want to do, one-on-one all day. It really wasn't my jam. I'm actually very extroverted, which is very unusual for our industry. I'm usually like a kind of an outlier. Most therapists are pretty introverted. Yeah. And I just realized I couldn't be in a room with one person all day, that I was more, groups and outward and so that led me to the clinical entrepreneur world, I think. But yeah, the codependency journey for me was, again, as it is for most of us, based on my own journey.
Yeah.
But prior to moving here, prior to being in school, I was in a relationship with somebody who struggled with alcohol functioning, but definitely struggled with alcohol. And to be fair, pretty much everybody I knew did. It was New York in your 20s. Right.
Not struggle than to struggle. Yeah.
But it definitely was hitting that point, late 20s, early 30s, where I was noticing that it was starting to die off and his wasn't. And it was, continuing. And so I started doing my own work. I started going to Al-Anon. I started really kind of diving into this world. But it wasn't until in the last couple of years, I think, in my current relationship with my partner, that I really started putting words to some of the experiences I felt like were not being captured in the 12-step world.
Yes.
Right. So first and foremost, one of the biggest things for me that I will get on my soapbox about all day, and most therapists don't, is that we're all codependent. Period. We live in a codependent society. We have been taught that love is codependency. The word codependency is really kind of still othered as if it's like you're either codependent or you're an addict. No, we're all addicts, right? It's just that one person's Jack and Coke is just my people pleasing.
Yes.
Serves the same purpose, right?
Exactly.
And I've really been on a bit of a crusade for the last couple of years ever since starting to uncover this. I mean, leading groups and writing and doing a lot of kind of personal research, but also with clients, et cetera, on educating whoever I can on the structural, the kind of societal way that we are programmed to be codependent. And why it's so important that we understand that we unravel it, that we break it down, the connection between that and also the patriarchal structure that we live in.
Yeah.
Right. So it's become much bigger than me, I guess.
So the crusade is working. Would that be safe to say?
It's working for me. I'll tell you.
Okay.
I mean, my partner might be like, ugh, because there's a lot of shit in our relationship that I'm like, listen, we are breaking this down,
Yes.
But it's been pretty profound for my clients too. I mean, I hate to say that it's like a radical paradigm shift, but it is a radical paradigm shift because we're a bit of a trail. People who are working and functioning in their relationships in this way are a bit of trailblazers, and so we don't really have anybody to look to as who's done it before us. So it can be tough, but it can be really powerful and transformational. Yeah.
I'm so glad that you brought that up about society as well. I teach, when I teach my students as a professor, I brought up to them the book, The Giving Tree.
Hate it.
Basically the codependent.
Hate it.
And I read them the page at the end and they're like waiting on bated breath because it's like rarely do your teachers read you a children's book in school, but like graduate and college. And I'm reading this to them and I was like, and then he sat there and after she had given all that she could to him and he was there in silence, she was happy. And I look at them and I'm like, this is exactly why most of us struggle with the giving to get. And I want to feel appreciated by how much I do for you. But then I'm resentful because I did this thing for you that you never asked me to do in the first place, that I hoped you noticed me for. It's these messages that we receive. And if I could have a word with Shel Silverstein, I know that's not possible, but
which I love. I love Shel Silverstein, right? Like it's so hard for me.
No,
because I love him.
The Giving Tree is no.
Do you know that I took it off my shelf? So somebody gave it to my kid because it's a classic. Somebody gave it to her as a gift, and I regifted it. I got rid of it. It's not even on her shelf. And one of the chapters, one of the chapters in my book is actually called "Fuck the Giving Tree," right? And that is the chapter that I go into codependency on, which exactly it. It's like it's trained into us from birth. And by the way, what you said about giving them something that they didn't even ask for, I would add to that and say, even in that book, which is still codependent as all hell, the kid does ask for it.
Exactly.
And she keeps saying yes. Right. So whether the person asks for it or not, if you are giving out of resentment, if you are giving out of fear, you're acting codependently.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the traits and the behaviors, this might resonate or this might relate to the way you work with your clients as well. Sometimes the name or the title, either, especially with social media, they'll walk in and they'll have self-identified as that. And okay, we'll work with that. I'm more concerned about the clients where they are exhibiting those traits and they've talked about it or they've read the books or they've gone to 12-step or Al-Anon or they're in the circles or the ethers of it. But that word or that identification with that title might not be it. It's being able to kind of go in the psychic back door, if you will, of like, okay, well, let's look at the traits and behaviors. It could be called Barney the Purple Dinosaur disease. That's neither here nor there. Do these traits work for you? Do they not work for you?
Yeah.
What parts of the self get gratification from this?
Yeah.
And if it is causing impairment or stress, how can we adopt new behaviors instead and slowly start to retire the old behaviors? So they like that. I work with a lot of corporate people. They like that language more because they're like, okay, this is making some more sense. It's not like you're trying to rip my soul out of me and who I've built myself to be for all of these years.
I'm all about ripping the soul out, actually.
I like it. There are times where it isn't most effective. I have noticed. I'm very blunt and very direct, but then there's some clients where I'm like, that would just hurt. And we're not in the business.
I agree with you. I mean, I'm all about like the Trojan horse. There is one thing to be said about the codependency landscape, in my opinion, which is like, we need to call what it is. And I do think that once you talk about it, once you pull back and you talk about how it's societal and it's a structural thing, and it's not like you are codependent. It's like, we as a society are codependent, and here's what those behaviors look like. In my experience, even the really like high functioning exec types are like, oh, okay, so I'm just part of a system.
They like that. Yes.
Because also I think it's really important that people listen. And I know you and I can probably riff on this. Like there's the social media thing is both good and bad. There's positive and dark, right? Positive and negative, light and dark. One of the positives is that we do have language, right? For this stuff. Lovely. One of the negatives is that we now overuse certain language.
Everyone has language. Yeah, there are no barriers to people having this. Yeah.
Did you see that? Was it the Times that just came out and said that gaslighting is like the number one, is like the 2022 word of the year or something?
I retweeted it because I like humor and
Cringe.
comedy. I retweeted it and I said, no, it's not. And people were like, this is hysterical. And I'm like, this is the kind of humor that we need. Like, no, it's not. Let me gaslight you back. I agree that people, it's the barriers to access that like anybody could go on. Not that I use the DSM, I use the PDM personally, the Psycho Dynamic Diagnostic and Analytic Manual. I don't necessarily like the DSM for other reasons, but anybody can go on and buy it. And I've had clients years and years ago who just bought it and they're like flipping through. I'm like, how did you get that? And they're like, you can just buy it on Amazon. I was like, okay, we've overcorrected. Like there's too much access to things that really need to be processed or handled with a trained professional or a trained mind around, because we can, I mean, even in grad school reading through that, it's like, I have that. Oh my gosh, I have that. Oh my gosh, I have that. You have to look at it from a different angle if you really want to be able to heal it. And social media breaks down those barriers. And I'm appreciative for clients who have sought solace in that, or they found out they do actually have something from like, oh my gosh, that's a thing that I can get help with. I had no clue.
It helps, right? Yeah.
Yes. That is great. It's when it's used, it's from a weapon rather than an intervention, or it's used as an excuse or justification or a blame or a labeling or a diagnosing of somebody else when they don't have the like clinical training or they've never met the person. They heard one behavior once, saw a post once.
Narcissist. Yeah. He's a narcissist. Clearly they're narcissistic.
Really, and all of my expertise. And it's like, oh, okay. I teach like a 2-day lecture on narcissism in my classes. And at the end, the students are like, okay, this makes a lot more sense, because in self-psychology, all of us have narcissistic parts. It's how well they're integrated or not. Mm-hmm. And if it's a healthy expression, was it integrated well starting from infancy, from childhood? Was it maladaptive? A lot of coping skills, like we talk about, are adaptive. Some used for too long in the wrong context become maladaptive.
Right.
There's a necessity to normalize all of us have narcissistic parts. It is how well they're integrated or not that would delineate if it is a true disorder of a personality, or if it's a maladaptive expression of a trait or an adaptive expression of a narcissistic trait.
My favorite thing to tell my codependency classes is when we start going on the narcissistic train and everyone's a narcissist. My favorite thing is to talk about how codependency and narcissism are actually two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, the magnet syndrome.
And usually they're like, oh, and I'm like, yeah. So every time you point a finger outward, you should just turn that finger and point it around to yourself, right? And then most people start to cringe, and I'm like, well.
Both ways of coping with self-esteem concerns, self-worth concerns, and feeling, is it Ross? No, I always mess up his name. He wrote the book, The Self-Love Deficit Disorder, speaking about codependency, or on that continuum, especially the human magnet syndrome. They are ways of coping with negative self-esteem, or lower than most people would like versions of.
I just call them like their other-oriented personality trait, like personality styles, right? So like my personality is based outside of self. My self-worth is based outside of self, self-esteem, etc. But when you look at both of them in the same way, and you see also too, I think the empathy for people who actually do truly struggle with narcissism, right? True NPD. It can be helpful to start to explain it in that way, because once we start looking at it as, oh, I'm actually filling a void in myself with someone else. Oh, let's talk more about that void, right? Let's get more curious about why that person has a void to begin with. Then suddenly, once that empathy opens up, it's a very different conversation than just like, oh, well, fuck them. They're a narcissist, you know?
I'm huge on that as well, in describing what those archetypes are like, or even societal examples, and then being curious and digging in deeper, what may have caused that. It's not excusing the behavior, and it's not writing off that, or not acknowledging what's happening. What really is going on underneath it that would cause that, and how can we help you? Because like the quote goes, most people are in therapy to deal with other people who won't necessarily go to therapy. And if you are wonderful and you don't think anything is quite wrong with you, or it's other people's things that need to change, why would I self-report? It's not me, it's you. If you're the one with the problem, you go to therapy about it. And because all of us have those narcissistic traits, each of us, I would say, has one behavior where we're like, this is okay for me, but if other people do it, it's misbehavior. And I'm just not going to like it when other people do that, but I'm exempt from it. We all have those blind spots.
I feel like we have, a lot of us have a lot of those blind spots. Yeah. I actually just caught up with a client, a girl that I had as a client as a teen years ago, and we caught up for tea yesterday. I hadn't seen her since before the pandemic, and she was just kind of like asking some relational advice, and I just kind of put it out there. I was like, well, I think it's really interesting that the last, I don't know, let's say 3 or 4 guys that you've dated all seem to have this one very specific trait, right, that you don't like. And I said, I wonder what the common denominator is here. And she was like, she just looked at me, and I was like, listen, you know, I love you. And you also know that I'm always going to call you on your shit. So like, let's start pointing that finger inward, which it's not like, you know, to shame you. And she's very self-aware, but sometimes you have those blind spots.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And being able to change, seeing how much change we can affect in our own lives by empowering ourselves to view it that way. It's not self-blame. It's taking accountability for your part in the patterns and the behaviors that you engage in, and being like, oh, okay, don't love that. My clients are like, I feel both seen and attacked. And I'm like, that's the goal. That is my brand.
That's what I'm working for.
This is congruent and resonating.
Doing my job.
How can we then shift that? If you don't like it and you are aware you play a part in it, what can you do to change, to mold, to shape, and not about going in and trying to rescue or fix or only be other focused? We have to take that accountability, and I'm big on accountability.
Well, I mean, what do you have if you don't have it? Right. I mean, and listen, this could go for any behavior or any, you know, self-actualization process. I mean, it takes you out of that victim state, which is very powerless, right? And it puts you into the powerful ownership state. And even people who have been truly victimized still, through a lot of work, can step into that powerful state. And it's only in that powerful state that things will change, right? Or that healing will happen or growth will happen. Again, even to those who have been victimized, and growth and healing is 100% possible for every human on this planet, but it doesn't usually happen until you step into that state, right? Which is tough, because when you're hyper identified with it and you feel like by moving into the powerful state, you're somehow, you know, giving somebody carte blanche, or you're somehow saying that a behavior was okay. No, you're still giving them the power in that dynamic. They still have control. They still have the power, right?
Yeah. Moving into, and a lot of the clients I've worked with, especially given that my specialization is confidence and assertiveness, being able to help them shift that mindset and that way of showing up in the world to an empowered stance. Many of them almost kind of holding separate for a moment the victim stance, the victimization by self or by society, or they've actually had some sort of crime or some tragedy happen to them, keeping them in this mindset of, you're available for this. You are capable of doing this, even if this is not a mindset or a way of being you've ever adopted before, or ever been allowed to, or have previously been shamed for trying to, because many of them really did want this in childhood, but it was the family system that would be lopsided or topple if, especially a child, for certain generations, you can't have power. You don't have a voice. You can't do this. You can't speak up for yourself. Be compliant, be complicit, follow these rules. And then they get spit out in the world between 20 to 30. And they're like, who am I? Who are you? What's going on here? How can I use my voice? And ended up recreating their childhood homes by not having a voice in some of their adult relationships.
I'm really fascinated. What's coming up for me right now is I've been a bit like in these TikTok holes around the generational differences, right? Like psychologically. And years and years ago, I read an article, or I can't remember, it was like the Times or something, maybe the New Yorker, that was talking about how boomers have the highest rate of narcissism, right, of any generation. And so much of what I see in at least the younger boomers, kind of cusp boomers, is exactly that. So I was, children should be seen and not heard. If you want an opinion, I'll give you one. Those kind of little quips, right? And then they go out into the world again with this kind of what we were saying earlier, this hole, right? I have no sense of self because it was never allowed to be established. And then they go out and then they enact on to the people around them, right? Those narcissistic traits. Mm-hmm. And again, it's not to excuse it, but it's really fascinating when you start to look generationally at how that shows up, right? Because if you look at boomers who were raised by most people who came out of the Great Depression, right? Were children in the Great Depression. How does that affect? Okay, now we've got, how does that affect? Then you have Gen X, right? Who were the latchkey kids, kind of just neglected as a generation, right? Who then gave birth to and are raising, the younger millennials. I mean, it's just so fascinating when you look at how all of this psychology works on a generational level. But that was what was coming up when you were saying that. It's like fascinating to me.
Yeah, I wrote for a thesis that I wrote. I learned it actually in my poetry class in undergrad many years ago. And it's one of those moments where somebody finally puts a word to something that you've conceptualized and you see it like visualized and given a word. I was like, this is it. Like, this is what I've been trying to explain. Like, perfect. And then I remember going through my thesis and I'm like, what is it? Oh, there it is. And it fell in, and it's called an antithetical gyre. So imagine you have we're on video, but like you have two triangles. So like one is coming this way, and this would be the start of the generation. And as it tapers off, and as this one is tapering off, you almost like flip the triangle. One is just starting and expanding. So you see kind of like a children's toy, like Tetris, these antithetical stacked on top of one another, that the beginning of one generation or the cusp or the peak of one generation before it tapers off is the start of the other. So a lot of these lockstep core values, morals, beliefs, ways of being, is the world safe? Are people safe? Is the world trustworthy? Are people trustworthy? They get passed down. We know this epigenetically, but they also get passed down in the nonverbal, the verbal behaviors, the nonverbal behaviors. Am I accepted into the in-group of my family socially, or am I excluded? Am I in the out-group of my family? So I don't want to be in no human one. We're very averse to having needs and speaking about them biologically in evolutionary psychology. And we're very averse to being in the out-group in social psychology. So you mix that in with the family system, and the thesis work, essentially, to spare multiple hours on the podcast, is so much of what you're describing, what we're describing today, is those systemic patterns being passed down because it's almost a way to stay connected to a previous generation. And it's not necessarily intended to harm the future generation. It's my way of staying connected to my family. And even if it's quote unquote wrong or quote unquote not the best, or however it's worded, it's my way of staying connected or honoring their memory or keeping them alive in some way, whether I'm fully conscious of why I'm doing it or not. And then bringing that into the awareness. This is where parents become very defensive when children bring up something, no matter how well it's worded. I loved every part of my childhood. This, if we could have had this more, would have been even better. Nothing negative there. Defensively split off because the parent can't handle being seen as both the good object and bad object at the same time. So they kind of collapse psychically. Well, I guess I failed. It's all bad. Yeah. I guess I failed. If you're going to see me as one part bad, I'll be all bad, and I'll storm off and regress back to a more emotionally immature, almost toddler-like state. Because it's not to dismiss adults or toddlers, the brain is forming. We don't have those emotional regulation skills, and we do go back and access that when we can't tolerate being seen as both a good and bad object. We get defensive. When we do the inner work, if somebody brings that to our attention, hey, loved all this needs some work, we can go, thank you for your awareness. I'm so glad you brought that up. You're right. I will never know what it's like to be raised by me as your parent, but as you as my child telling me this, I get that. I can see how you could feel missed in that way. And I talk a lot about, where did your parents miss you and where did they meet you? So were you missed or were you met? And being able to bucket your experiences and take a look at, wow, these were not met a lot of the time. These were missed, or these were met 100% of the time, easing more towards that secure attachment to self, and then to orient to others more securely too. But it's fascinating. Sorry for the diatribe, but it's fascinating about that, the good and bad object, and how people sometimes and often cannot tolerate they just want to be all good all the time.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there's so many points that I want to grab onto, but I think that that's just the reality, whether you're a parent or not. I mean, that's the reality of all of us, right? I mean, this is why so many people show up defensively, right? Because they equate, I have done something bad, air quotes, with I am bad. Right. And then you can't separate those two. I mean, I still struggle with that. I mean, obviously I've gotten exponentially better through a lot of work, but when you're caught off guard, or if it's somebody that you love or in an attachment relationship with, especially a primary attachment relationship, which essentially becomes mostly for us, it's the romantic partnership, it immediately sends me back to being a kid, right? I mean, I dissociate, arms get crossed, face gets hot. I mean, every somatic symptom that I imagine I would have had when I was a kid comes right back to the surface, right? And part of the work for me has been paying attention to the body sensation is really important, right? Noticing it, staying with it, tracking it, naming it out loud for him sometimes can be really helpful. I'm feeling really hot. I can feel the heat. And I even will say, like, I'm starting to dissociate, like I'm shutting down, like I need to take a break. But a lot of it for me has been through the doorway of the somatic world, mostly because that was my entry point into healing, right? Was through kind of yoga and mindful movement, and being able to use that as my barometer of like, it's happening. Here it comes. It's happening. It has, but yeah. I can kind of get in there and be like, okay, this is happening. I need to take a break. I think for a lot of people, if we can give them the kind of training and the skills to pay attention at a minimum to the internal system of the body, it really can provide you that like speed bump where you can be like, okay, I gotta pause. Like the body's getting a little too out of control, right? We're getting a little too dysregulated.
Yes. Yeah. And so many couples that, because you see couples as well, or mostly individuals. Yeah. Both, most of the couples I work with it's not conscious to them, obviously, because it's a subconscious defense mechanism, but they get locked in this projective identification cycle where the one partner is almost interpreting, like partner A is interpreting partner B's behavior as if it is the condescending dad, the cold mother, whatever or even the therapist sometimes experiencing us like that. And they are reacting as such. And if partner B, in this case, is unaware that that's really who they're responding to, they engage with it. They get locked into these identification cycles, and that's the cause of a lot of the conflict. And I am so proud of my couples when they come back in after months after graduation, and they're like, oh, this one thing came up, but we did want to say the next time or the time after we had a fight or almost conflict, I didn't see them as an enemy. I didn't see the need to fight with them. I just stood like the lighthouse. I teach them to be the lighthouse. Like I just stood like the lighthouse and was there and watched them go through their process and offered to them, I want to be there for you. I don't know that this is about me. I don't know that this reaction is at me. I'm happy to take responsibility for whatever part is. This almost sounds like some dad stuff. If they've done that work, that deep kind of like being able to gain and foster that trust. And then the partner will, let's take the breath. Somatically, they see the shoulders unclench, the jaw unclench, often the tears flow. You're so right. And being seen in that way, like having your adult partner see adult you and little you and care for both of you at the same time, phenomenal. I am so proud of the couples.
I love that. And I want to reiterate what you said and part of that, which is like when you've done a lot of that work, because if you haven't, oh boy, can I feel condescending. Because in my head, I'm going, even now, I'm going, if he ever said to me, I think this is mom stuff, I'd be like, get out.
Excuse me.
Get out. Yeah. And like, and I've done a lot of work. And even me, I'd be like, don't you dare.
Yeah. I have my couples read two psychoanalytic based books that I got as part of my training. So I'll take a few of the very poignant excerpts and we talk about that in the beginning of the work. And that gives them language. So I'm not kind of hoping that it sticks or having that huge gap with wording and nomenclature where they're looking at you like nodding, like that sounds cool, but I have no clue what you're talking about. I don't know what
you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. It's giving it, this is what it would look like, or is this kind of what your conflicts sound like? Giving an example. Here you go. Oh, that does happen. So sometimes, and I'll word it like that. Sometimes what happens is this, does that ever feel, oh, okay. And then it becomes now common language that they can adopt and use in their homes and in their interactions they have with other people. And that plus humor, that's why I do this podcast as well. I think those are real big hallmarks of healing and being able to take that breath and, to your point, note it. And I talked to my partner about this too. And I'm like, old me, 14-year-old me, 20-something-year-old, 30, whatever it would be version of me, I would rip your head off right now if I just did that. New me, who loves you and loves that we're spending our lives together, doesn't want to do that. So she's going to say this instead. And I will like bring those parts into the room. He's not a therapist. He's like looking at this and goes, okay, so we're good. Dinner now? Can we talk about that? Like, we're solid. He's the most securely attached person I've ever met. He should be a case study. Honestly, it's so easy to work with him, but I've been with partners previously who were not. And that would have been eliciting that response of like, how dare you abandon me right now? Or how dare you say that it's a mom thing? Like, no, it's a you thing. Sometimes being right. And sometimes it would be a mom thing. Yep. So who you're partnered with and the trust and the communication style that you've established with them also makes a huge, huge difference and impact on rupture and repair, honestly, on both.
Totally. Yeah. I'm just laughing because I just know myself and I'm like, I could just picture it now being like, oh, you did not just say that.
Nope. The laughing. Yeah. I always tell people if I start getting so angry that I'm laughing, it's not a good thing. You might want to go because something is about to happen. Yeah. There's like a morph that's going to happen.
But it is, I mean, this idea of like bringing that kind of 14-year-old version of yourself into the room can be so powerful, right? I mean, I know that I have actually expressed with him, you know, growing up, I lived in a house where, I mean, my mom was kind of like the son that everybody just, you know, rotated around, evolved around. And so she was allowed all the big feelings, but there wasn't really space for anybody else to have them. Right. And so I think as an adult, so much of my work in healing has been allowing myself to feel big things, out of control, you know, rage, like all these things and come out the other side knowing I didn't die. Right. It's okay. I can feel these things. People aren't going to leave. And what you were just saying about kind of bringing that, well, the 14-year-old version of me would have said X, Y, and Z. I think that that's a really helpful way, especially with women that I've worked with who have a really hard time expressing anger and rage, right? Because societally we don't allow that for women, to actually be able to say that, like to bring it into the room in a way that feels real, but also contained, maybe a little safer. The 14-year-old version of me right now would be flipping this table. You know, like that is actually what's happening in my body right now. What I want to do is flip you off and slam the door in your face. Right. But I'm not going to do that.
Please scream. And it's so nice because it feels like a release. It's almost like like theater or drama, if you will. It's a release. I'm not going to do those things, but to know that I don't have to store inside a shadow part or a dark part of
pretend,
right? Yeah. Fake it, roll my way through it. I can bring that out into the light. And also, especially, I mean, I can only speak for this partnership that I have. He's voiced, he's appreciative. He's like, thank you for letting me know that's what goes on for you, because he, not being a therapist, is like, you seem like you know everything, and not in an egotistical way. He's like, you, out of the two of us, you are the expert on relationships.
You've got it together, right?
Yeah. It's so nice to know that you have these parts of you that could just go like crazy or whatever else. Yeah. And we laugh about it. I'm like, isn't that so nice that I don't do that to you? And he was like, yeah, I honestly don't think we could be together if you did. I'm like, fair point. I agree. And then we can move on and have a repair. But me knowing myself, knowing that he can care for all versions of me helps with the secure attachment. And whenever that anxious attachment flares up, I go back to, I can bring this up. It is safe to bring this up. I will not be abandoned. I have been proven over years and years, time and time again, this is my lighthouse. He is my lighthouse, and he influences positively so much of my clinical work, because I can sit there, or my podcast, or whatever I'm doing, the clinical entrepreneur in us, whatever role I'm in, I don't have a worry. Yeah. That is such a secure part of my life that I can return to in a secure base. And he came from a very secure family as well. Again, they're just so secure. It is an anomaly. I just sat there like first holiday, and I'm like, there's no yelling. I'm coming from a loud Italian, German family. I'm like, we're not. Oh, wow. Okay. And I almost dissociated from how healthy it was. I'm like, what is this kind of response?
There's no resentment. I don't feel any, like, people aren't throwing daggers. Like, what is happening?
I'm like, wow, is this what like non-clinical, non-people who ended up being a therapist families are like? Like, fascinating. This is so cool. There's a whole other world out there.
The Drama of the Gifted Child, right? Have you read that book? That was a big one.
Oh,
I remember when we came back, so that was like our first semester, of grad school. They sent us off. We came back and they were like, so how many of you felt like this was you? And we were all like, raise our hands, like 30 people out of 30 people.
Yeah. They used to call it, Alice Miller is the author, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The first iteration, one of my analysts was like, the first iteration was the prison of childhood. And it didn't sell well, shocking no one. So they renamed it the Trauma of the Gifted Child because many people who they're like, oh, that's me. And getting called dramatic yes, I'm so glad you brought that book up. Whew. Oh, I knew this would be a great episode because you have the depth background as well. This is wonderful. Yes. Yeah. Love that book.
That I'm like right now kind of diving into like I'm nerding out a bit on the Venn diagram of gifted. Specifically with girls and women, gifted,
yes.
ADD, and spectrum. And let me tell you, it will blow your mind.
Blow my mind.
I mean, I'm in it right now, so I'm not going to be able to totally articulate all of the shit that I'm kind of rolling around in, but It is the whole idea of even gifted being in that Venn diagram is even just like a week old for me, kind of realizing this and seeing this in research. So just really specifically, again, generationally starting to look at least within, especially motherhood and like new parenthood, how many women I know that hit this point of like, I'm done. I'm tapped out. This idea of being touched out, this idea of being, it's hyperstimulation, right? Overstimulation. I have nothing left to give. All of these things that we hear a lot of, especially new mothers say. I kind of went into this rabbit hole around that, and then the hypersensitivity that shows up right in on the spectrum. And there's so many crossovers. There's also so many crossovers between ADD and spectrum, right? What's really important that we understand is that most of the things that we think of when we think of autism or ADD are based on the study of boys and men, right?
Yes.
Which is not shocking. This is all psychology too. And so we're only just now in the baby stages of really seeing what that looks like for women and for girls, right? And it shows up a lot differently, especially spectrum stuff. And so, with girl, it's the social stuff. So, and this is not like across the board, but it's what I'm seeing in research is that it's very common. So with girls, we are socialized from birth to be social, right? That social aspect is super important. Yeah. It's not a biological thing. Usually it really is just how we are, we're created in these environments. Be empathetic, care for other people, pay attention to what's going on, be nurturing, right? So the reason why we've got a lot of girls who slip under the radar of being diagnosed on the spectrum is because they don't show those social cues. Those behaviors are learned from very early on. So even if they would otherwise be presenting like the boys typically are, right? Not making eye contact, not being able to have intense conversations, all of these things. It's not showing up that way, right? It's usually showing up for girls more in the nervous system stimulation, the overstimulation. What happens is they're showing up a lot as gifted.
Yes.
Right? Which we know boys in the spectrum tend to be highly gifted in a lot of ways too, right? But the girls are missed because a lot of those social cues. It's really, really fascinating. And so, I can't even really articulate all the things to be articulated right now. Just know that I'll have a book out probably next year talking about it because I'm like in the rabbit hole right now. But that word gifted is just like such an aha for me because I'm starting to realize how many women, myself included, were given that title very early on, right? And now as an adult, the things that I'm struggling with and going, oh shit. I actually think it's a little bit of that. Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. I
avoidant attachment, also part of it. Oh, is that really avoidant attachment? Or is that actually a little bit more of kind of the spectrum, ADD, gifted, anyway. I'm not even clearly articulating it, Talia, but it's
No. I love talking to people who are in that aha phase of realization and insight. And insight's a huge part of psychodynamic and psychoanalytic therapy and my mindset of the world as well. A book that might be extra fascinating to you that I looked at from when I was doing research on helping couples try to understand each other from the evolutionary psychology perspective, as well as what's happening socially. Like, how do we bridge the gap? Because the expectations we were taught is The Female Brain by Dr. Luann Brizendine. You might want to add that to your research list, your book or your paper, because it really does explain so much of what it's like developing in utero, the structures, the hormones, and how the exposure or lack thereof, if a parent's pregnancy is going one way versus another way. It is fascinating how much all of those less for what you're being socialized for, the biological structures, and nature versus it's a good case of nature and nurture all at the same time, because we do develop differently, and pending what we are constructed by or sculpted with socially, that does interplay and look like certain traits being encouraged, certain traits being discouraged, some being expressed but going under the radar. And I was put in a GATE so when you were saying that, I'm like, could this be me? Because I was put in a GATE program very early on, and I was in GATE education my whole upbringing.
Same.
My brother was as well, and I loved it. And I knew a very specific type of student and type of learner who could fall under that and thrived in that. And then having to go be like in Gen Pop or like the normal schools afterwards, I was like, this is not my group. This is not my people. And then finding more of the honors classes, the gifted, like being of not a mental caliber to be dismissive, but like there's just a certain way of thinking and viewing the world in some of those classes that I was like, this feels like home. I'm finally around people who get it. And that's how I felt when I started analytic training years ago. I'm like, oh, this is it. Cause I didn't like CBT.
But
I
the
like
people,
DBT.
the people, right, that you're around, and you're going, oh shit, like this feels very familiar to the kind of environment I was in when I was younger. Right. And so I wonder too, I mean, I don't know that this research has been done. I think it's very early, but like, I wonder if you're talking the drama of the gifted child, how many of those people too actually start to fit into this, what we're talking about, right? Especially the women. Because again, we know therapist is a very female heavy industry, right? And I don't think that's just about like, oh, we're nurturers. I actually think there might be a little bit of what we're talking about in there, which is this like quote unquote gifted. And again, I'm saying quote unquote because it's like that could mean so many things. And to be clear, I was a C student in math. It's not like I was incredibly intelligent in every way. It's not about that. You know what I mean? It is like you were saying, it was just a different way of thinking and looking at things. And how many of us, I'm sure, that are categorizing themselves or are shaking their head yes to what you and I are saying, got told from very early on, like, oh, you're an old soul, or, oh, you're so
wise.
Yeah.
You're so smart for such a young, it's like, you're this for this. It's like this comparative analysis, but it's an upward social comparison, which then you feed into humans like validation across the board, especially girls, because socially and in evolutionary psychology, we had to survive like that hunter-gatherer mentality. If you were not contributing to the tribe, if you weren't providing value, you would get left behind if they went to another village or had another establishment, the weakest link. You do not want to be the weakest link in the tribe or the least value or provide the least value. And we do relate on communication on such a heavier level because, again, just going back in the hunter-gatherer days in part, if you spoke as a man, you would die. You could not give up the location because the lion would find you and die, and everybody in your family would die, or the tribe that you're responsible for. Women survived off of this. Don't eat this berry, eat this fruit, do this. I found this over here. Even the advantages of some of these structures and functions of society were much better back then. They were life or death back then, but our bodies now don't know if it's life or death. We're still operating on a lot of things, feeling as though they're life or death. If somebody doesn't like me, I feel as though a part of me will die. If you don't show interest in me, I feel as though a part of me will die off, or that I will be so unsafe. I will be left to fend for myself, and I will feel like I don't have the capabilities to do that. That is a primal, very evolutionary, innate fear. And yet we can still overcome our drives. We're not just operating all of this off of what our human drive is. Knowing what your drives are and your core drivers are, very helpful. And knowing that we can behaviorally condition ourselves and sculpt ourselves to be different versions, should we choose to take that path, is also very empowering knowledge. So yes, I'm such a big fan of this research that you're doing, and I'm curious to learn more and happy to help if you would like more research. This is so fascinating to me. I would love this.
Send it all to me. I'm so in the like rabbit hole of all of it right now. You know, I'm going to be starting some groups probably in the beginning of the year, specifically geared towards, because the lens that I'm writing it through is this lens of like the new mother, because I'm realizing a lot of women, it comes out during that early motherhood. Like these are these things that we've either, you know, totally repressed them, or it's this whole like, have they been working for us up until this point? Right. And now suddenly they are not. And why is it that motherhood is what kind of kicks it into high gear, you know, and obviously we know why, but anyway, I'm going to be starting some groups in the beginning of the year, for mothers struggling with similar things. And I'm going to be using it a lot as like research for this too. So maybe I'll have you come in and lead some groups.
I would absolutely love that. I think the what do we call it? Analysis, primary maternal preoccupation that infants experience, it doesn't leave us, at least from I'll never be out of school. I love being a nerd. It's loud and proud. Like that's a symptom. I'm like, no,
I know.
Classic gifted child, never not going to be a student. But one of my mentors one time nailed it when he said, you know, it really sounds like you have the most self-identity around being a student. I started school like 3 years old, and I was like, fuck, he's right. For however many math was not my strong suit either. For a while it was, then it was, and then it was back on. That's a lot of years having that identity as being a student, and now an educator and a teacher and an orator and a speaker. And so much of that is being a walking encyclopedia, as my students have said, and then being able to disseminate and give the knowledge in a digestible way as well. I've met many people who have both, many people who only have one, and many people who only have the other. So they're like a very gifted speaker, but the knowledge just doesn't flow, or they really have all of it, but they're more of like that type 5 Enneagram, if you will. And I relate to that as well, like the college professor archetype, where they have all the knowledge, but they're almost hoarding it. Like, well, I can't give it out because what? I'm like, you got to give. It's like the rainbow. It's like a reverse rainbow fish, where we start with giving out the scales, but not in a codependent way. I'm really big into children's books and like analyzing that. Part of my creative college was creative writing and studying poetry, and how much of those parables and stories do translate to our regular day-to-day life. So yeah, I'm happy to help sit in, research, whatever it might be, because this does need to be spoken about more. And it's so freeing, especially when that is a whole new identity coming online. I was actually talking to my dad and brother about this a while ago. I was like, you guys will never understand what that's like, because you don't literally create and have the child. Empathy, sure. Trying to get us what we need, sure. That is something, though, that is going to be such a unique experience. And so many of the books on parenting and this and what new motherhood is like, again, to your point earlier, are archaic, and they're written by men.
Yes.
It's not, I have a great respect for men and deference to a lot. It's an experience that cannot be understood by somebody who doesn't have that built system where a part of you is created and you have your cells and your grandmother's cells at the same time that you're having your child, and then you're expected to be this new person. The life stops. The life of the man, or the person who is getting us pregnant most of the time, does not stop in the same ways. It doesn't stop on the day-to-day. They don't have the reflux, the weight gain, the loss of the body, and to look at themselves and not recognize in the postpartum journey can last for quite some time.
Years.
It's something to develop it's something to develop a lot of empathy for and understanding. And just even the question for men to ask female partners, like, how can I best support you through this? And not necessarily jump into the like, I know, or the you're touched out, or you don't know what it's like, in the same way that the partner who's going through it knows what it's like. And so for you to be another crusade, it sounds like, spearheading this, eternally grateful. Every woman in society will be grateful for this. So happy to be here at the forefront with you.
If I can give one person language, you know, and allow them to have just something to talk to, whether it's a partner or just themselves, about what this experience is. And because I'm still in it, you know, my little one's only 2.5, almost 3. And so it's like, I'm in it. I am so in it. Lovely. Yeah, love her to pieces, and also stop touching me.
Yeah, both at the same time, right?
I love him. Why? And please stop touching me.
Yeah. It's the birth of we talk about this, I talked about this a lot in my infant, child, and adolescent training year and analysis, the birth of the mother. So yes, there's a birth of the infant. When the birth of the infant occurs, there's also it's your birthday. It's the birth of, I mean, when you find out you're pregnant, but like it's the birth of you becoming a mother. And that is not something, I mean, many books, more books now, at least from what I've seen and researched and read as well, are talking about it a little bit more. And if you're in the field of psychology, you might have a different, not Trojan horse, but like you have just different knowledge base to look at for different books, especially more analytic based. That's my preference, or I guess my kink, I would say, as I love psychoanalysis. Looking at it from that perspective, though, how much we are focused on making sure, and which is a good thing, like ensuring secure attachment and how can I meet their needs and learning. And a lot of it is just intuitive. And a lot of it is being able to still meet your own needs and not being in a state of self-neglect to as much as possible. And knowing sometimes it's like, I don't know what I need. And that's why midwives and doulas are becoming a lot more on the rise and normalized. It's not so in the outskirts or like, oh, they're a weird granola person doing a home birth. It's this innate sense that women understand. Usually,
we've always understood,
but we always more than men.
We've always understood it.
Yeah.
It's coming back to what we were doing. It's not, this is nothing new, right? No. Like, no. I mean, this is the Aquarian age. I mean, it's the rise of the feminine. The patriarchal structure that we live in is dying off. It's not working. We are unhappy. Our earth is dying. And it's gone on for too long. And so we are, as a people, shifting back into what we were before, right? Which is more of a balanced masculine and feminine state. It is a respect for the feminine. It's an integration. And I don't know that, let's say, I don't even know, guess 20 generations ago, however long ago it was. I don't know that they would have been dealing with the same processes that like I'm dealing with from my generational perspective, because they had support systems. They were still in a village. The mother wasn't expected to do all the things. It wasn't just two people living in a system, raising a child alone. Right. And so it's almost impossible to compare really what's going on right now with what was going on then, because it's such a stark difference. And this idea of this birth of the mother, I mean, it's also the death of the maiden, right? And I think that we don't give enough honor and respect to the death, the grieving that goes into becoming a mother. It's supposed to just be all happy all the time. And that's just not true, right? It is truly, truly a death of self. And you'll never get that self back ever again. And I don't think it's like, oh, it's so sad to talk about that. Is it sad, or is it just true? Is it realistic?
It's grieving and it's necessary.
Yeah,
like,
agreed.
Let's talk about that more, because I think that would help a lot of women to be able to know they're not alone in feeling that. And I talk to so many moms about this too. They're like, well, I just see these moms in the playground and this and I'm probably saying this. They're like, yeah. And it's just, the way that they're talking about it's just always amazing all the time. And I'm like, and let me guess, you're feeling like it's not always amazing all the time. And they're like, yeah, is that weird? I'm like,
they're
that
lying.
Is normal. That is more normal. And they're lying, or they have 5 nannies or whatever it might be. They've created their own village, which that's a positive thing if people can afford that or work on the self state of it's okay to ask for help, like reconstruct their psyche, if you will, around accepting the help and having the village. And to your point, yes, many years ago it was here's the village, and now it's like let's 2 people move across the country and have no support system and not really a good sense of self and friendships and all of this, and do the most hard thing and often in the most difficult year in the first 1 to 2 years of marriage, plus have a baby. Good luck. I wonder why they got divorced. I don't.
I don't know. I can feel it in my body. I'm like, oh, I hate it all.
I feel like we need to do a whole other episode at some point. If you're okay with this, then we could talk for hours about this.
Please, let's do it.
Well, I will set that up with you. And before we wrap, I want to say thank you. This is exactly how I hoped that it had gone in my mind. You are a wealth of knowledge and very fun to talk to.
Thank you, Talia. Yeah, I appreciate it. This was great. And don't think for a second I'm not going to be hitting you up for research nuggets and for bouncing things off of you and all the things, because it feels like you see it. You see the vision.
Oh, I get it. I see the vision. I am on there with you. Another book that you might like is in closing, I will give you this last nugget, is the the psychological birth of the human infant. And it really talks from an analytic perspective, and also being able to reflect back of our birth. And we are going back through Erickson's stages of development from the time we become a mother all the way up. So to be able to share research that I've done too, I'm happy to assist. And yes, thank you again. I really appreciate your time and your expertise.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Of course.